In this video article, we're going to look at 3 more ways that writers can build their idea muscles. Before we get started, if you want to get an email with a timestamp overview every time I release a new video, then go to my website at deliberate-practice.com. You sign up for my email list there. There's other content at that website, and in the weeks and months to come, I'll be creating some email subscriber only content as a thank you for signing up. So, this is obviously a follow-up to the previous video, and in that video we looked at 3 ways you could use to start building your idea muscle. This is a concept, it's like a learning metaphor for beginner writers who are struggling to come up with ideas to base stories on, and it's ways to start creating story ideas with the goal that further down the line, as you get used to creating story ideas and as you signify to your brain that this is important to you and it starts working on it subconsciously, you'll start getting ideas that turn into stories, and you'll no longer have to ask that question, where do you get your ideas from? The 3 ways we looked at were to borrow timeless story ideas. So that could be things like Romeo and Juliet in New York led to West Side Story and so on. If you go and see the previous video, you'll see more suggestions on each of these things. The second one is you can tell a supporting character's story, or tell a story or a similar story, but from the perspective of the supporting character rather than from the main character, as you're probably used to in that story. The classic example of that is The Lion King, Disney's The Lion King, where that's basically Hamlet set in the African jungle, but Hamlet is Scar, the uncle, Mufasa's brother in that film, and Simba is the nephew who in Hamlet is going to usurp Hamlet at the end of the story. So we're telling, or the Disney people were telling that story from that perspective. So that's another way of doing it. The third idea I suggested was look for the cracks in the story. So and I definitely recommend you go check the video out, because it's a great little Harlan Ellison vignette in that story, in that video rather, at this point, on how he asked himself a question, who's making the maps? But the cracks in the story means look at things in the story that are kind of taken for granted and see if you can go, well, how would that come about? Who would have done that? And the couple examples that I came up with for that were in The Matrix, that all the humans are connected and living in pods, and they power the matrix, their energy and their thoughts, but at some stage somebody had to design and build those pods for that purpose and persuade humans to go in them. So that could be an interesting kind of story that you could spin off from the Matrix. The other one, which was sort of similar, was the telescreens in 1984, the 2-way telescreens that the authoritarian states used to surveillance their citizens, and at some stage someone must have invented that, and that invention must have been taken over by the state to help build those surveillance societies. So that could be you could create another kind of science fiction based, dystopian based story based on that. But lots of stories have got world building that's kind of not really spelled out in the story, and you just kind of can look at some of those stories and create story ideas based on that. My favorite one of all the ideas I talked about in the previous video was Rogue One, the Star Wars film, which I think is the best Star Wars film in the whole Star Wars universe, and that was based on a line of text in the crawl in the opening credits of Star Wars: A New Hope, where it said rebel spies had captured the Death Star plans, and someone turned that into the story that became Rogue One. Really good story, really good film. So that's an example of how you can do it. But remember, all of these things are exercises that are designed to prime your idea pump and designed to get you coming up with ideas. That's the main purpose of them. If you get stories out of them, that is a bonus, but they're not expressly for that purpose. They're for the purpose of teaching you that you can generate story ideas that are viable from almost any piece of information that you can find or that you see, or you could see a movie and go, well, that movie was crap. I can make that better, and if I change this character to this kind of character, and we had these different plot events, and suddenly you've got a new story that's based on something that you saw that wasn't very good. So there are all sorts of ways this can filter in to your writing, but the primary goal of these exercises is for you to do 1 or 2 or 5 ideas a day, and do it every day, so that your brain gets the idea that, oh, we need to come up with stories. And then your subconscious brain, Stephen King's Boys in the Basement, will start working, and you'll start getting your own stories based on the stories you like, the stories you've read, the stories you've watched, pieces of non-fiction that you see, asking what-if questions for various things. That will all start happening, and this is a way to prime that process. So the first one I've called the Hollywood High Concept Game. Now, this is how Hollywood executives used to pitch film ideas. I don't know if they still do. I got a lot of this info from reading William Goldman's 2 great books, Adventures in the Screen Trade and What Lies Did I Tell? And if you're a writer, you should read both of those books. They're great books. They're not specifically aimed at fiction writers, but there's William Goldman was a great novelist as well as being a great screenwriter. He's a great non-fiction writer too, and there's some interesting material you'll find in there, and the books are entertaining. So if you can read a book that entertains you and you get some decent knowledge out of it as well that you can put into your process, that's a double win. But anyway, this is what used to happen. So for example, Die Hard on a Bus is the movie Speed, and the reason this was done and this kind of pitching style evolved was because you could, in 5 words or 10 words, you could get over the concept of a movie by relating it to 2 movies, or relating it to a movie in a new setting. So Die Hard on a Bus is some kind of terrorist activities involved, and it's on a bus, and there's a cop-style character who's trapped. That results in Speed. Another one, Jaws in space equals Alien. So you can see how that, I'm sure Alien wasn't pitched like that, by the way, but you can see how that idea kind of works. It's a spaceship, there's a monster on it, and the crew have got to stop the monster in the same way that Brody and the other members of his team had to try and stop the shark in Jaws. My favourite one of these examples, Groundhog Day meets science fiction action, leads to Edge of Tomorrow. Now, if you've not seen Edge of Tomorrow, this is nothing to do with this video, but some people haven't seen Edge of Tomorrow. I think it flopped at the box office in terms of what the studios were expecting. I think it's an excellent movie. I think Tom Cruise is brilliant in it. The concept's great. I think it's based on a Philip K. Dick story. Really good movie. Yes, it's a Hollywood movie, and there are some things that are a bit over the top, but very interesting premise, and I really enjoyed it, and I have sat and watched it with a couple of my boys, and they both enjoyed it as well. And it's not the kind of film that they would normally watch, but they were quite pleased that I'd introduced them to it. So if you've not seen Edge of Tomorrow, that's a good movie. If you like, especially if you like thoughtful movies with action scenes, it's a really good movie. Anyway, how do you actually go about doing this? So you pick a film or 2 films or stories. The first one communicates the story tone, and the second communicates the milieu. Now, you could just say for the milieu is like in space, so it doesn't necessarily have to be another story. But if you can get a second story in the first story, then you're getting an interesting blend of different story types coming in. So The Shining on a long-distance space voyage is something that I came up with. We've seen long-distance space voyage like colony ships, that kind of thing. It's a trope in science fiction. And The Shining is the story of a guy who's a caretaker of a hotel that's closed in the winter, who's going slowly mad, and the hotel is haunted. So there's lots of things that you could pick from that. Instead of it being haunted, there could be some kind of malevolent artificial intelligence that's giving him messages. There's a million things you could do with that, but that would be quite an interesting concept. Or how about conspiracy theory Jack the Ripper in contemporary London? Now, I've put conspiracy theory Jack the Ripper with conspiracy theory in brackets because nobody knows and nobody's identified who Jack the Ripper actually was with any degree of certainty. But if you search Jack the Ripper books, there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, all with different this is who it was, or it was a cover-up and it was linked to the Masons, or it was linked to a member of the royalty and it was covered up. So what you get, this concept is there's some kind of serial killer operating in contemporary London. It doesn't have to be London. It could be anywhere that's the centre of some kind of politics. So it could be Paris, it could be Washington, maybe New York. So there's some kind of serial killer operating, only he's not a serial killer in the sense of like the Hannibal Lecter style serial killer, but he's a serial killer and the killings are done because there's some kind of political connection with them. And so that gives you a rich story world, politics London, politics in Washington, wherever you're choosing to set it, wherever you're based, where you're listening to this. So if you're in America, you'll probably be more familiar with Washington than I am, but I'm probably more familiar with London than you are, that kind of thing. But the conspiracy theory is the interesting angle from me. So mixing the serial killer, but making the serial killer having something to do with some kind of political plot or political undercurrents. I think that would make a really interesting story. Or how about the Maltese Falcon in Victorian London with a Sherlock Holmes style character swapping in for the detective in the Maltese Falcon. You can play this game with all sorts of things. If you're really bored and want to try it out, you could go to your favorite AI and say, I'm doing this exercise. I'm looking at detective stories or science fiction stories or horror stories, whatever kind of genre you're interested in. Give me 20 combinations of stories that aren't in those settings in this format, e.g. Jaws in space, and see what it comes up with. And some of those might go, yeah, I can spin a story out of that. But it's better if it comes from your own imagination, in my opinion, because you'll pick stories and things that interest you. So like both The Shining on a Long Distance Space Voyage and Conspiracy Theory Jack the Ripper in contemporary political London, both of those ideas actually interest me. The Maltese Falcon in Victorian London, less so. But you can spin that exercise however it works for you. Number 2, start with the end. Let me talk about this in more. This is related a little bit to the video I did, which is called Brandon Sanderson, Outline from the End, Right from the Beginning. It's got some crossover with that, but what's interesting about this, I just rewatched literally last night with my youngest son who's gone back to university today. I rewatched The Prestige, and the double twist ending of The Prestige, and I'm not going to say anything more than that. They are brilliantly set up. Both of them completely sideswiped him, and he was really engrossed in seeing how the movie was going to play out, and both of the endings really came out of left field for him. And I think for something like that, it's better to set up by starting with the end and then working back from the beginning. And this really works well for stories with an unexpected story turn at the end. So like The Prestige, that's got 2, or The Sixth Sense, or it also works for stories where the audience thinks they're watching one kind of story, and then there's a twist at the end. And so the example of that was, I think it's called Now You See Me. Woody Harrelson's in it, Morgan Freeman's in it, and that movie, it's kind of similar to The Prestige in some ways, combines magic, but the magic's used to conceal a heist, or seems to be about that. But then at the end, the plot twists and turns, and it's actually a revenge story. So if you've got something like that happening, starting with what happens at the end could be the way to go forward. And this is how to do it. So you pick how you want your reader to feel at the end of a story. So say you want your reader to be sideswiped by twists. You start with the twists. What are the twists? And what kind of event would actually make them go, wow, I never saw that happening. So like in The Sixth Sense, when we find out that the Bruce Willis character, and I hope you've all seen The Sixth Sense. If you haven't, please stop now. Please stop watching now, or fast forward for 20 seconds. But when we find out that the Bruce Willis character is a ghost, it makes so much sense, and all those things that we weren't sure of why they were happening, but they were just weird, all suddenly made sense. So you come up with the event that makes the audience feel the emotion that you want them to feel. And then once you've got that, you can work out who the main character is, who's going to be there at the end, because usually that emotional wallop will come from something that happens with the main character, and it possibly give you the inciting incident, and suddenly now you're off to the races. So a quick example of this, I was thinking about this just before I filmed this video. So imagine you're writing a detective story, but the detective is the murderer, and you don't want the audience to know till right at the end. So you then design what kind of event reveals to the audience that the detective is the murderer. And then from there, you can go back to the start and you can think of the things where you can layer in the clues and the things that the detective does, that the audience, when they find out he's the killer, will go, oh my God, why didn't I see that? So that's an example of how that could work for you. And if you spend 10, 15, 20 minutes free writing on how that might work, suddenly you've come up with a potential story idea. And that's the point of all these things. It's not necessarily to come up with stories that you'll write. It's to get your story brain working and ticking over and going, well, what if this happened? Oh, if that happened, what about this? That would be the next domino that falls. Or you can go the other way and go, well, if this is how this scene ends, what needs to happen in the scene before to get to that? There's many ways you can set this up. The important thing is that you're spending some time every day coming up with one or more new ideas. The third way to do this is you can transplant a character to a new milieu or setting. So remember, these strategies are about getting your story muscles working. And remember the caveat in the first video about IP and being really careful about lifting other people's IP or using IP. And what you don't want to do is to take a character type and then use the same setting that character type is in. So for example, if you go to Amazon.com and search Jack Reacher, Lee Child's stories, you'll probably see in the recommendations and the sponsored book listings connected to Jack Reacher, there's multiple series of similar Jack Reacher style loner heroes in kind of thriller fiction now. So Lee Child's was the first one to really set that up. I think in the Jack Reacher was the early 90s he started, but now there's at least 5 different series using very similar characters in the same kind of settings, and none of them, from what I've seen, do it as well as Lee Child's does. So if you're going to use a character like Reacher in a contemporary setting, then twist him around, make him a coward, make him a pacifist, play against the expectations. But the better thing would be, if you're going to be inspired by a character like Reacher or use a character like Reacher, is take him to another setting. So how do you actually do this? Well, pick a character that you like, transplant that character to a new milieu, and then think about the story. So for example, you could take Sherlock Holmes and bring him forward in time to like a cyberpunk dystopian setting. You could make him some kind of highly intelligent computer hacker addicted to some kind of new drug that's going around in the dystopian setting, and then maybe Watson is AI. A million things you could do with that kind of idea. Or you take a Lara Croft style character and transplant her to a steampunk setting. So all the gadgets and stuff are all steampunk gadgets, but she's doing the same kind of thing. Maybe she's looking for archaeological artifacts, depending on what exactly the political ramifications of your steampunk setting are. That might work and be quite interesting, and also be quite interesting having that kind of female kind of all action character in a steampunk setting, where the steampunk vibe, which is kind of like Victorian with the steampunk ethos, is more male oriented society. So that could be quite interesting. But there's hundreds of ways you could do this. I'll repeat the caveats from the previous video. These ideas are just meant of ways that you can start stirring your creative juices up, and these give you starting points from which you can create story ideas. Press the wrong button there. Let me just fast forward those two. If one of those ideas catches fire and you write a full short story or even something longer, a novella or longer, that's a bonus. That's not the end goal of these exercises. Success doing these exercises is coming up with 1 or 2 or 3 story ideas a day, and doing that and teaching your brain that coming up with story ideas is something that's important to you. Key points: the more you work on the concept of generating ideas, the more ideas you'll get. The goal is you teach your brain you're interested in stories, you teach it you like to mix and match ideas so it can generate original stories by combining elements of existing stories or existing facts, which is how most people come up with stories. And hopefully at some point you'll be walking the dog or in the shower or driving the car, and suddenly a story will come like that and form. It'd be like a eureka moment or a light bulb moment, and you go, yes, I've got this idea for a great character who does this, 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 and this. And then you can go to your writing space and you can make that story come to life. And doing these kind of exercises will help you get closer to that point. So closing out, this process works to come up with one-line sketch ideas or more detailed explorations. Either are fine, and both help to build your idea muscle. This kind of content appeals to you because you're relatively new, or you're frustrated, you're an aspiring fiction writer, then check out the resource I'm putting together exactly for writers like you, and for writers who've written a few stories and want to continue along this journey and get more serious about it. I've been putting a resource together to help all you guys and girls. The resource is at that URL you can see there, writing-vault.com. There'll be a link in the description below. Go and check that out and see what you think. If you've got any questions on that or anything in this video, or if you've got your own story idea starters that you use that I've not mentioned, then drop me an email, paul@deliberate-practice.com, and that should get to me, and I'll reply to you as soon as I can. Thank you for watching. I hope some of these ideas help you develop some story ideas and start building your idea muscles, and I'll catch you in the next video.